Hi, this is Beth from Around the Table Yarns, and today we are joined by designer and knitter and mathematician Kate Atherley, and she is going to be leading us in the beginning of our Dip in the Road socks, which is this sock club. It's our selection for sock club for April, May, and June. And welcome, Kate. It's really lovely to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for hosting me and inviting me to chat with you and knitting my sock.
Knitting.
That honestly will never grow old for me. The idea that's like something that I knitted that I kind of thought about and something that makes knitting something that it made me happy to knit it. And the idea that other people are going to enjoy knitting it as well, it really is. It's an absolute delight. So thank you for that.
You're
So
very welcome.
I've got a few slides with a few sort of things to talk about. And I'm also going to show you the socks, but I want to make sure that I'm answering questions. So for those of you who are attending real time, I will open the chat window. But I would, as I'm
And
chatting,
I will.
I'd love to hear from you guys what questions you might have about the pattern itself or about sock knitting in general.
Perfect. So
So
I
yeah,
will I will monitor the chat window so that you can focus on the things that you're focusing on. As
excellent. Thank
as
you.
you all are thinking of questions, put them into the chat and I will read them out to Kate. And then I also know that we had at least one question from this morning's class. So if that's okay with everybody, if you can go ahead and mute. I don't know if everybody's on mute, but I'm going to mute the people who aren't.
Perfect. Good. Good. And that
And
because that helps the recording, and people will presumably be able to unmute themselves if they have a question,
yes,
or we'll just do
they
that
are
with the
absolutely allowed to unmute. And I will mute myself for the moment
perfect.
until there's a question that I'm going to interject.
All right, excellent. All right, so a few things that I wanted to talk about. I thought I'd kind of introduce you guys to the design. I'd show you the sample. When you're choosing a pattern online, I mean, you've got the pictures, but I'll give you a guided tour of the samples. Talk a little bit about the yarn choice, because here we want to make sure that with a pattern sock, we're choosing a yarn where the coloring is interesting, but not too interesting, we'll talk a little bit about choosing a size. I'm going to yeah, I know I'm going to talk about the S word. I'm going to talk about swatching, but I have a cheat. I have an amazing cheat for you. And then I'm going to talk about casting on. I'll talk about my favorite cast ons for socks. But if you have any questions as I'm going, as I say, don't hesitate to ask. So let me give you a tour of the design, and we're going to change off to my secondary camera here. All right, and here they are. You don't need all my needles and yarn in the view there. Here's a sock of the pair. And this sock was inspired by sort of my thinking of late about making sure that we're making socks that last a good long time. So I've done a few things in this sock that are about longevity. The coloring of the background, they're a little bit too close to the color of my background. Let me see if I can find some. Oh, I've got an envelope here. Nope. Let me see if I can find something where there's a bit more contrast. Okay, this is the one thing I didn't prepare. A very grubby. Oh, that's a little bit better. I think you can see things a little bit better. I hope there's nothing embarrassing on the envelope written. There's some notes about grafting stitches. Hey, who knew? Anyway, so a few things in this sock were motivated by my thoughts about longevity. Because now I would never say this to a new sock knitter. So I'm hoping I don't have any new baby sock knitters in the room. But it takes a while to knit a sock, yeah? There are quicker ways to get socks. We can go to the mall. Have you had that conversation, by the way? Have you been stopped by someone in public? You're knitting on the train or on the bus or something, and what are you doing? I'm knitting. What are you knitting? I'm making a sock. And they think, and the first 400 times, it's funny. You can buy those in the stores, right? Yeah, thank you. Good. I can buy them in the stores. And that is a more efficient way to acquire a pair of socks. We could go to the store, absolutely. But if we're going to knit them, I want to make sure that the time that we're spending knitting them is worth it. In a few ways, in terms of they're a yarn that we love. Again, this camera does funny things to the colors. That's probably a truer representation of the color. So it's a yarn that we love.
Mhm.
They fit well and they feel good. And I'm going to talk about choosing a size, but I also want to make sure that we're rewarded by having them wear a good long time. And so there's a couple of things I've done with this in this specific pattern to make sure that they're good and hard wearing and they reward you with a long life. One of them is that I knit quite densely. So we'll talk about that when we talk a little bit about gauge, but you see some sock yarns, also known as fingering weight yarns, and you'll see patterns that might call for 28 or 30 stitches in 4 inches. I want you to be knitting stitches at 8 stitches an inch, 32 in 4 inches. So you've got a good dense fabric, so that will wear well. Also, I have used reinforcement and I've run a reinforcement down the back of the heel, a standard slip stitch reinforcement. And sock knitters may well be familiar with that. It's the knit one, slip one, knit one, slip stitch reinforcement. But my favorite heel turn, so I use a heel turn it has multiple names, of course. These things are never straightforward. It's known sometimes as a Dutch or a square or a band heel, and you can see there's kind of a square that sits under the heel. The thing that's notable about that is because of the way it's constructed, you can actually continue the reinforcement into the underside of the heel.
Oh, nice.
Because for me, and this was one of those light bulb moments, I see reinforcement on the back of the heel all the time. That's pretty common in a sock, but that's actually not where I tend to wear my socks out. I tend to wear my socks out on the underside of the heel. And so there was this big aha moment for me a few years ago where I realized, you know what? There's no reason why I couldn't continue that reinforcement. And even if that's not necessarily where you wear them out, that's actually quite comfortable. So thinking about longevity, it's a good dense fabric. It's a reinforced back of the heel and it's a reinforced heel turn as well. And so I know that people do have favorite heel turns. Absolutely. I get that. And as a sock knitter, you get comfortable with a heel turn and you're able to do it without reading the instructions, which is handy because again, we're often on a bus where people are providing helpful commentary, or we're watching something good on TV, or we're just distracted, so we like it. We get used to a heel turn and we'll use that one over and over again. What I would say about this is, if I may encourage you to use the heel turners written the first time you knit this pair, maybe the second time you knit the pair, feel free to substitute your favorite heel. I see people putting short row heels in. I see afterthought heels. I see a bunch of different ones. And I love that about sock knitting, that is very modular, that we can put the ones in that we love. But I would encourage you with this one to at least the first time through knit the heel as written. Fair? Thank you. And then see if it works for you, amazing. And if it doesn't work for you, well, you've learned something, right? So the other thing I have done with this sock is I have made sock 1 and sock 2. I'm reluctant to call them left and right for a reason that I will explain, but I like a sock that has a little bit of knitting interest, but not so much knitting interest that I'm needing to glance at the pattern every round. I do want to watch something good on TV. I do want to be able to kind of chat with my friends at midnight, or if I'm tired or what have you. And what I did with this particular stitch pattern is it's a nice plain sort of easy sailing stitch pattern in that alternate rounds are just all knits. And then the other round, you've got a few purl stitches. You've got 3 columns of purl stitches, which flow nicely down from the cuff. I like that design detail when something flows nicely from the cuff. And what I did with this was I put it on one side of the foot. Just on one side. They're jaunty. I figure it's jauntier that way. Yeah, just for a little bit of interest and a little bit of fun. You don't have to do it that way. You can have them match. But do you guys, have any of you experienced that the scourge known as second sock syndrome?
No, I don't think anybody's ever had that problem.
No, no, never. So I like doing a different 1 and 2 to help maybe keep second sock syndrome at bay just a tiny bit.
In
I'm
Sock Club, we talk about doing it like do the first part of the first sock and then do the first part of the second sock.
Yeah, yes, do them
And that helps people like continue all the way through Sock Club and finish the pair.
That's actually a really smart thing, and it would be actually a really smart thing to do with here, because the legs are exactly the same. Where the sock 1 and sock 2 are different are where you set up for the heel flap, because obviously the instep like the patterning is on the other side. I will make one note, although that I have a left and a right, ostensibly a sock 1 and sock 2. This is where I'm working against my efforts for longevity. So just a note of interest for you guys. And I would suggest that this is something that you will be instructive to pay attention to. The same thing happens with shoes. We always wear shoes on the same foot. Yeah. My house slippers less so, but with shoes, you always put your right shoe on your right foot and your left shoe on your left foot. And like in my case, the heels kind of wear down on a bit of an angle on the outside. My partner's kind of on the inside, like his feet are different than mine. His step is different, gait is different than mine. But we wear our socks consistently. And so if you're always wearing the same sock on the same foot, they can wear out a smidge faster, because they might always be experiencing rubbing or pressure in the same place. Does that make sense? So it's a useful exercise. Boy, I'm making this sound like homework, aren't I? It's a cool thing to look at. How's that? If what you do is, after you've been washing and wearing the socks for a little while, inspect them. Inspect them to see where there's a little bit of pilling, a little bit of rubbing. Because what the pilling tells you is where the sock is rubbing against your shoe or rubbing against your foot. And that gives you a bunch of clues in a bunch of different ways. That actually tells you where to apply reinforcements. And it's better to know that before it wears out, right? Because fixing a hole is harder. Also, if you find that there's one area, like on the left side of the left sock or on the right side of the right sock, where there's really a lot more wear on one than the other, that might give you a clue that once in a while you should mix them up and wear the other one on the other foot. Does that make sense?
We were talking about why it was left and right, and
Yeah.
we had a newer sock knitter in the class this morning who was making them, and she was like, but will they fit differently because one's for the left foot and one's for the right foot? And I said, no, they're shaped the same. I
Yeah.
said, it's not that they're left-sided or right-sided, it's more that they're mirror images.
Love, elegantly put. Absolutely. Thank you. And again, I did that kind of for fun and to keep second sock syndrome at bay, but you can see sock patterns where there's shaped toes, anatomical toes. And so they're sort of more angled on one side than the other, but I tend not to do that for this reason, so that hopefully they wear a bit longer. So yeah, because you don't have to have them always on the same foot, depending on where you like the stripes. Also, if you get dressed in the dark, although it's spring now, so I'm less likely to be getting dressed in the dark, but it does happen on those winter mornings where you're just not going to, there's not enough daylight to, I'm lucky if the socks are matched, honestly. Anyway, so that's a tour of the design. So I built them with longevity in mind. I built them with to keep second sock syndrome at bay, a little bit of sort of playfulness there. And there's one other thing that I will show you as well. Let me return to my camera. So I talked about using my favorite heel turn. I also use my favorite toe. Okay. I'm on record about this. I have written about this, and you may have heard me talk about this before. I am not a fan of a grafted toe. Grafting, also known as Kitchener stitch. I'm not a fan of a grafted toe because I find that a toe that has a grafted or closure is quite flat across the top. And my toes aren't flat across the top. They're shaped a little bit like my hand in that if this is my big toe, my second toe is actually weirdly a little bit longer than my big toe. Somebody told me once that those are Roman toes. I have no idea. They're my toes. That's all I know. But we're not always like really flat across the top. And so for two reasons, in fact. The first is that I'm not flat across the top. The second reason is I think that this is easier. I use a toe closure that doesn't require grafting. And so the instructions for that are in the pattern, but I'll talk you through them as well. So, and again, socks are modular. So I would encourage everybody to knit the toe that they like and that fits them best. But in this context, I would say, can I encourage you to at least give mine a go? To try it for the first pair? Because again, if we're going to spend time on this, if we are going to, dare I say it, spend this much time and effort and love and energy and yarn in these socks, let's make sure that they last a good long time, right? And that they're comfortable and they're exactly the way that we want. Fair? Right. So a few notes about the pattern as well, about the way that I've written the instructions. With the exception of my beginner sock patterns, I do something really specific with the instructions, which is that I'm not specific. I write the instructions out in a way that I describe as, I've been known to describe when I'm feeling cheeky, as needle agnostic, needle independent. And here's a link to an article on modern daily knitting. And I was actually just pulling up the thing, so I'll get it for you. Hang on. Oh, it's disappeared. And modern daily knitting. Hang on. And that link is a lesson on and information on using the different configurations for knitting socks, for knitting in the round, because we used to use double pointed needles and sock patterns used to be written for double pointed needles. So hang on. I had the link and then I was tidying up and I closed a bunch of, here we go. Oop, nope, there it is. And there's a bunch of different ways of knitting socks. You can use double pointed needles or magic loop or two circulars, or you can use these flexible double pointed needles. And so there's a tutorial there, a little bit of information on using these different needle configurations. And that the way that I've written in the instructions, I'm not giving you specific needle by needle breakdowns of the stitch distribution, for example. I just say, distribute stitches across your needles as you prefer and join for working in the round, right? Because if you're on magic loop, you'll have a sense of how it needs to go, which is half and half. And that applies to two circulars. That applies to working on flexible DPNs. But if you're on regular DPNs, traditional ones, you could be distributing your stitches across 3 or 4 needles, right? There's a bunch of different options. And so although I've given some tips, I've written it generally so you can use the needle configuration you want, because I think that's important. And as I mentioned, there's a picture here too. I've used a reinforced heel flap and turn. And the thing I refer to as the barn toe, the no graft barn toe, because I find that fits me well and it's comfortable. And also, can I express an opinion? Again, if socks are my away from home knitting or on the bus knitting or really good TV knitting or knitting with my friends in a social environment, I don't necessarily want to get out my darning needle and sit there for a few minutes saying knit, slip, purl, slip, and remember the steps of a graft. So You can, something to try. How that toe goes, by the way, just to kind of explain how it works. You use the same old decrease round that you use in most top-down socks. So there's nothing different about the decrease round. You've got the decreases at the sides of the foot, 2 on the top and 2 on the bottom. What's different though is the decrease pattern. What we're doing is, instead of just doing decrease round, decrease round, even round, you do a decrease round and then 3 even. And again, these instructions are written into the pattern, so there's no need to write them down specifically. And then you do a decrease round and 2 even rounds twice. So you're changing the spacing of the decrease rounds. Does that make sense? Then you do a decrease round of 1 even 3 times. And so what you've got is your decreases start spaced out and they get closer together. And then you work only decrease rounds until 8 to 10 stitches remain. And you pull the yarn through and cinch up to close. And the reason it's 8 to 10 stitches is depends on sort of how many you cast on and whether it divides evenly by 4 or not, basically.
Liz asked, with that
Yes.
decrease, do you have to knit the leg a little longer?
So Liz, I'm thinking you probably mean the foot there. Yes. Okay, good. Okay, just checking. Actually, what's funny is this toe is a little bit longer than a standard grafted toe.
Oh.
And what I've got, hang on, I'm stuck in, give me a second. Sorry, I'm stuck in my Zoom annotations. Hang on, let me stop the share for a second. Stuck in my Zoom annotations. Here, what I've got, okay, Zoom, you're being weird. Is it showing okay for you guys?
We see you now.
Okay, I'm getting flickers. Okay, let's share the screen. On the pattern, I'm sharing the pattern with you, and I'm just going to zoom up to the relevant section. And hopefully the annotation will work. Again, it says work even until foot measures this distance short of your desired finished foot length. So Liz, you are correct in thinking that the length of the toe is different than a standard grafted one, but actually it's a little bit longer. But the information about how much space you need to leave is in the pattern. So hopefully that's helpful. Good question. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so let's go back to my slides here. So yeah, and I use this toe in most of my top-down sock patterns because for a bunch of reasons. Again, no grafting, and I find it comfortable. And it absolutely does not come out. I promise it doesn't come out. You cinch it up like a hat, then you poke the needle through to the inside, and then you weave the ends in. It's good. I think it works well. So yeah, there's my graft-free barn toe. All right. So should we talk a bit about yarn choice quickly for a second here? Okay. Couple of things to note about yarns I use for sock knitting. I look for a couple of characteristics in sock yarn, and you know, this may well have already come up in discussion with the group. I look for a yarn that is specifically made, designed and blended and spun for sock knitting. So I like a yarn that has multiple plies and is pretty tightly twisted, because again, that will last longer. I also look for sock yarns that have nylon in them. This handsome creature is a merino, and the merino sheep is a lovely, lovely beast. They produce beautiful yarn. I think they're handsome. Their yarn is soft. Their wool is soft. Their wool takes dye very well. It has a little bit of a shine to it. But the thing to be aware of when you're choosing a sock yarn is, in general, a sock yarn that's soft is a sock yarn that's fragile. In fact, that's true of all yarns. Like something that's super, super soft is going to be a yarn that will be a little, that will tend to wear out a little bit. And so what, you know, when I see somebody in a yarn store holding some yarn, and if you see someone and I'm looking at them and they're choosing sock yarn and they're petting the sock yarn and they're starting to get kind of up close and personal and they're, oh, it's delicious. And it's like, if it's too delicious, it's too fragile and it's going to wear out too fast. So save the delicious stuff for stuff that sits on your neck, like a shawl or a hat, because he had more hair when I met him. So when I'm making hats now for my bald partner, I think about getting something very soft. Save the really soft yarns for something where you'll benefit from the softness. But in a sock, we want something that feels a little bit more substantial, a little bit more hearty. So I'm rather than going with a yarn that's pure merino, because I know there's a lot of beautiful merino based sock yarns, I'm going to look for a yarn that's got merino and some nylon or silk. Silk is kind of great in a sock yarn because it's strengthening. Also, it's warming. Now, again, it's, if I say out loud it's spring, I feel like I'm going to be inviting snow. We're at that time and we're at that stage of year where, you know, you wash the parka and it means that we're going to get a blizzard. But I feel like spring is coming. But we will be thinking about keeping our feet warm again at some point later this year. And silk is an amazing addition to a sock yarn because it adds, well, it adds shine. It adds strength. Silk is strong. It also adds warmth. So silk is not a bad thing in a sock yarn. You do have to look for something that is designed for sock knitting. There are merino and silk yarns that are more garment designed, but a sock yarn that has got merino and silk in it, that one's nice. I also, though, if truth be told, I'm not always tied to merino. These creatures are the blue face Leicester. So there are some breed specific sock yarns out there that are nice because, and again, we like merino because it's pretty, but I will often find a sock yarn that is, you know, I'm going to prefer one that's not necessarily merino because it will last a little bit longer, not pills as much. Because again, softness is fragile and a fragile yarn is one that will pill and start to look worn. So BFL, Blue Face Leicester and silk. These creatures, mohair goats. So what's funny about mohair is a fiber that people do sometimes have a sensitivity to. And for some people, mohair can feel quite scratchy. But if you can do mohair, a sock yarn with mohair in it, indeed a sock yarn with mohair and silk is going to be a sock that's going to keep you warm and last a very long time. So, you know, I love that we're seeing dyers and yarn company looking further beyond just merino. And between you and me, I actually like those sock yarns that just say wool on them. Like 75% wool, 25% nylon. Or if they're the European sock yarns, it'll say polyamide instead of nylon. Because if it says wool, that means that it's a sort of a regular old mix of all sorts of different wools. It's kind of like buying extra virgin cold pressed Tuscan olive oil and vegetable oil, right? Extra virgin cold pressed Tuscan olive oils from the, you know, estates of George Clooney. Okay, I'm using my imagination here. That's going to cost more than vegetable oil. But if you're sauteing onions and garlic and chili peppers and all of that, you don't want the good stuff because it's just going to clobber all the beautiful flavor. So it's not worth paying extra money for it. I'd say the same thing about sock yarn. It's not necessarily worth paying extra money for the luxurious stuff because you're going to, okay, this is where my metaphor kind of goes sideways. Wearing a pair of socks is like sauteing onions and garlic. Anyway, you get the idea, right? So not necessarily something expensive and precious, but something a little bit more work a day. Did I rescue the metaphor there? Anyway, yeah. So,
I think you made me hungry.
yeah, fair. Yeah, well, it's the time of day. Yeah, salads. I'm thinking about salads. Yeah, look at the fibers, look at the wools. But yeah, there's some cool breed specific stuff like Targhee and Corriedale, and there's all kinds of delicious things. But you're not going to go wrong if you go with something that says 75% wool, 25% nylon. Honestly, that will be hard wearing. The other thing to think about when we're choosing a yarn for knitting a sock, and this sock and anything that has a pattern, is we need to think about the coloring. And this is the challenge with socks, because we get all of these beautiful hand-dyed skeins of sock yarn, and they're wrapped up in skeins like that, and you can't necessarily see what the coloring is like. I designed this particular pattern to withstand a fairly busy yarn. My general rule is the busier the yarn, the simpler the pattern should be. And the busier the pattern, the simpler the yarn should be. With this one, this stands up quite well to a fairly busy yarn. But, looking at these, so sort of comparing and contrasting. So let me get my zoom annotations going, right? This one is great. It's really quite plain. It's kind of a tonal yarn. There's not a lot of variation in the color. And so that one would be muted and subtle, tasteful, right? Mature, sophisticated. Yeah. Equally, though, I would love to see it in something like this, or something like this, because what you've got color changes, but they're color changes in the same family. Right? So although these will be busy, the sort of the color story will be fairly consistent. What you'll get with something like this, hang on a second. What you'll get with something like that one and something like this one is you'll probably get pretty busy, stripy kinds of things going on, which I like a busy, stripy sock. In fact, I brought one down because I was going to show you. I like a busy, stripy sock, but you'd kind of lose the pattern stitch in there. And so with a busy, stripy sock yarn where there's a lot of color changes, where there's a lot of difference in the colors, right? So you can see the difference on the far right there. There's red and there's purples and there's blue, whereas the one sitting next to it, there's still color changes, but they're really in the same family. It's just different shades of green. And the one beside it is different shades of pinks and purples. And so the coloring there will be more sort of like it will let the stitch pattern show through a bit more. Does that make sense? And the one on the left there, the one on the far left, is a really nice example. Hang on. Really nice example of one that I think is very much like the one I actually used for the sample. And you can even sort of see it in the skein. It's mostly a solid color with really short runs of contrast colors. So you get something that is, right, hang on, I think I have to clear the annotations before I can change over to my camera. So you get something where what you've got, see, there's a lot of color changes happening here, but it's more speckly because they're they're much shorter runs of color. Does that make sense?
So,
Now,
so
go
Liz
ahead.
Liz was with us earlier this morning and asked whether we thought this would work with a self-striping yarn.
Ooh.
And I think that you've answered that, though. If the contrast in the stripes is more extreme, it's going to work against the stitch pattern. But if it's within a color family or a more harmonious sort of striping pattern, it would probably work well.
Yeah, or something speckly. Yeah, it would. Now, Liz, I happen to be working on a pair of self-striping socks. I mean, don't ask me how many sock projects I have on the go. So I happen to be working on a pair of self-striping socks here. This is one where, because what you've got is you've got distinct, and these are actually pretty small. You've got kind of distinct sections of a given color before it changes. I think this kind of self-striping where the color delineation is pretty sharp, I think this would work well. The kind of self-striping where I think it wouldn't work quite as well is this kind of thing, because what you've got is the color, like the color delineation, it gets a little bit kind of fuzzier in places. Do you see what I mean? So something that's a bit sharper and crisper. This one, it's still stripes, but you get areas where it's a bit more muddly. So it would work with the Christmas. And one thing you can do to get a sense of how it might look is just, this is going to sound silly. Look at how the ribbing looks, right? Because this stitch pattern, it's not quite ribbing. It's sort of alternate ribbing. As I say, one round is you knit, and then the other round, this is knits and purls. And so looking at the ribbing would give you a sense of how much it would stand out. Does that help a bit?
Yes.
Yeah. So again, there's kind of no wrong answer here. I mean, all sock knitting is good sock knitting. All sock yarn is good sock yarn in terms of coloring and stuff, but just something to think about in terms of, whether how much the pattern stitch will show. And here's where I might be cheeky and say that if you like this structure, you can knit this plain too, right? You could just do the ribbing and then just do plain. I'm being cheeky now. If you like my heel and if you like my toe. So there are the socks in good light, all freshly knitted and freshly washed. Can I make another quick note about, so on sock blockers there? Okay. This is the perfect use for sock blockers. What sock blockers are for taking photographs. But you don't need sock blockers for the washing and wearing of socks. So the reason I'm showing you this, and then the socks that you saw on my from my camera there, they look a little, they're kind of not lying completely flat, and they're a little bit crumpled up. That's freshly washed and freshly dried. The reason that sock blockers, they make the sock look smooth and lovely, and they make them look beautiful for photography. But the reason we don't want to be using them as in the regular process of washing and drying them is that sock blockers can stretch your sock. And if you stretch your sock, you could be throwing the fit off. So this is where I talk a little bit about the fit. So let's look at the sizing information as it's presented in the pattern. And I've given you a piece of advice even before I've given you size information. Socks should stretch to fit. Choose a size about an inch smaller around than your foot, measuring around the ball of your foot. And this actually is pretty standard. This is true for all socks. Well, okay, there's a tiny exception. This is true for all socks with the exception of a sock that's really massively heavily cabled or a sock that's worked all over in stranded color work, because those two fabrics don't have as much give. So you need to make those a little bit closer to your foot size. But you want the sock to be smaller than your foot so that it stretches to fit, so it clings, it stays in place, and the leg stays up, so that it's not moving around. Because in fact, if the sock is too big, it will stretch and it will move around in your shoe and it will feel bulky. And that's actually how we get blisters, and it's how the sock wears out. So I've given you the information here, and I've been pretty explicit about this. Not all patterns are super explicit, but to fit a wearer with a specific ball of foot circumference, okay, and my foot is about 8¼ inches around. And obviously here you're going to go with, these are sort of approximates, right? And so we choose the size based on that. So the sock's finished foot circumference. So you'll notice then for example, let's get my Zoom annotations going again, that if I choose to make a sock for someone who's got a foot that's about 11 inches around, they'll be making the largest size, which is about 10, right? So the sock should be smaller than your foot. Now, if your foot is about 6.5 inches around, and that's getting into kind of a tween kind of age, right? The sock should be about 6 inches around. So it's actually not really an inch. It's about 10%, but an inch is a good guideline. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I measured my feet this morning.
Oh,
My feet like to change.
yeah, fair.
And today they were 8.5. And
Okay.
I I assume I'm making a guess that you would say to go with the smaller of the two sizes.
Yeah, so if we look at this, which is the third one in brackets, one, two, third one in brackets. Yeah, I would go with 7. Yeah, I would go with the finished foot circumference of 7.5 inches.
Okay.
So when you say they change, do they get larger or smaller than that?
I mean, I don't think that a tape measure and me standing on them trying, bending
No, it's
down
hard.
is
Yeah,
the most accurate way to
fair,
measure
fair.
around a foot. And I know that, like, for example, I spent a lot of time standing over the weekend. So
Yep.
there might be alterations in the fluid in my feet, whatever. But
Well, because you said this morning, so that was why I was asking, because if your feet swell during the day, and this does happen to us, especially if we stand, if you
oh,
measured in the morning, my inclination would be go with the larger size because I bet your feet swell a bit.
oh, so I should measure again now.
Measure again now just to see, right?
Okay, I will.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And
So that's
can
that's great advice. But if you stay between the sizes, would you recommend going smaller?
yeah, I would. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. And again, think about we want them to stretch to fit. And it's about 10%, but we often use the inch as a guideline. So yeah. Now,
Perfect.
if you do find that your feet swell, if you do find that you have a neuropathy, then going slightly larger than guided, but I would never make a sock bigger than my foot. In fact, I would never want to make a sock that was even the same size as my foot because of the yarns that we're using, because of the fibers that we're using, because we're using fibers that have natural give to them. Wool has natural elasticity. And over the day, with the warmth and the moisture of your feet, and I'm not saying you've got horrible sweaty feet, but our feet do expand, right? And our feet do produce moisture. With the warmth and the moisture of our feet, the wool will absorb that moisture and it will stretch out. So if when you take your boots off at the end of the day, the socks stay in the boots, that's generally a sign that your sock is too big, right? The sock should be staying on your foot. So think about, we need them to stretch to fit. Okay. Quick note here as well about the other aspect is the foot and the leg length are adjustable to preference because we're all different heights. And the other thing is that not only are we all different heights, but we all have a different relationship between our foot circumference and our foot length. So I can make a decent guess about how long your foot is based on your foot circumference, but I don't know for certain because maybe you have a narrow foot, maybe you have a wide foot. And so these instructions are all about you knit till they're the length you want. And that's why the instructions for the toe say until it's a certain distance short of your desired finished foot length. Does that make sense? It does require knowing the length of the foot that you're knitting for, which if you're knitting for yourself or for someone whose feet you have ready access to, like your TV watching partner, somebody on the couch sitting next to you, I can measure their feet, if you're making socks for someone whose foot you're not able to measure, you can actually do a decent estimate based on shoe size. And maybe what I'll do is I have a table of foot measurements, a good estimate of foot measurements based on shoe size,
We
which is
actually, we have your book, Custom Size,
oh good.
in the
So it's in there.
store, and we
Good.
do, and we carry it to sell. Um,
Okay.
we do recommend Kate's book, Custom Socks, partly because it is such an extensive lesson in how to get socks that fit well, but also because she has the best tables for shoe sizes and
Thank
measurements.
you. Yeah, exactly. So, and the whole purpose of those, just kind of a little bit of a disclaimer, because I've had a couple of people ask me about those. The exercise is not to line up, because people have emailed me and said my feet don't line up to the table. So does it not, can I not use the book? And no. The whole point of those tables is that if you're making the sock as a gift, it's a good old guess. Oh yeah, I do have kind of a condensed version of it that I'm happy to distribute. So maybe I'll email that to you and you can send that round to your yeah. All right. Okay. Right. So now that I've talked about fun stuff, the S word. The good news is we can flip those around. Now, everybody's been lectured about why you should make a swatch, right? Everybody's probably heard the lecture, and everybody's also decided that I don't like swatching for sock knitting. Why would I need to swatch for sock knitting? Because it's a little bit of a pain in the you know what. Yeah, fair. Now, that having been said, if you want to make a good dense fabric, and if you want to make sure they're coming out to the right size, it's a good idea to measure. Just to make sure you're using the needle size that's right for you, because that's what this is about, by the way. That's what the swatching game is all about. It's just about making sure the needle size you're using is the right one for you. But we flip it around, because what we can do is we start the sock. And in fact, Kate's very efficient and nearly painless method for sock swatching is cast on, work the ribbing. So start the sock. So here's what I do. I cast on, I work the ribbing, I feed a lifeline, and then I work about 2 inches in pattern. Okay. Then I slip the stitches to waste yarn. Give it a wash, just so, and you don't even have to cut the yarn. I soak it in lukewarm water. I fill up a little plastic food container or a bowl or something with lukewarm water, and I soak the sock in lukewarm water for a little bit. And that step is important because wool changes when we wash it, right? Especially if we're using a super wash wool, which chances are it can relax a little bit. So you'll get a much more accurate read if you give it a wash, just let it get wet. And then once it's dry, kind of didn't write dry there, but you get the idea. And the way that I soak it in lukewarm water, I will knit myself a section of my sock. I'll slip it to waste yarn. I'll dump it in some water. We'll give the dog a quick pre-bed walk because we don't have a backyard for us. So we have to take her around the block. And by the time I come back, I will squeeze the water out of it and then lay it flat to dry, and it will dry overnight. And then the following morning I can measure. And if you're off, pull back to the lifeline and change needles. So you get to start the sock, because that's one of the reasons we don't like swatching when we're making socks, is we want to, just start. You get to start the sock. And if you've got a usual needle size that works for you, then you're just confirming that needle size is correct. Fair? And you're not really losing all that much knitting.
So you don't pull out the ribbing?
No, keep the ribbing.
Because nobody likes to redo the ribbing,
right? Because ribbing is, nobody likes doing ribbing. And what's actually true here is the gauge matters most on the foot, right?
Fair.
Yeah, because the leg, with the ribbing is stretching anyway, so it kind of doesn't matter as much. So keep the ribbing because nobody likes redoing the ribbing. Keep it with your lifeline. Just check on your plane, and also, you can't measure your gauge on ribbing anyway, and it's kind of not relevant because it stretches around your calf. So just check on your assess on the live project. Does that make sense?
While the socks are on the lifeline and you're waiting for them to dry, if you still
Yes.
have time to knit that evening, you can do the other sock.
Brilliant. You can start the ribbing for the second sock. Heck yeah.
Just saying.
Yeah, I like that. Smart. Smart. So, we cast on. So there's a couple of cast-ons I like for top-down socks, and I recommend both of them, and the one that you works best for you kind of depends on you, which is to say that it sort of depends on how you tension your yarn. I like the long tail cast on, or there's a variation of the long tail cast on called the twisted German or old Norwegian. Again, in our craft, everything has multiple names just to keep it interesting, right? It's actually just a variation of the long tail cast on that adds a little bit more stretch. Now, the trick with both of these cast ons is that they are stretchy and you can absolutely get more stretch in them, but you do not have to do this. And I hope that I'm not contradicting advice you've been given by the shop, but this two needles held together thing is a myth. It's a red herring.
We do not do that.
Thank you. I knew I liked you guys. This is why we are friends, right?
Yes.
So the way that you make stretch in your cast on, and by the way, when I'm working in the round, I always start my cast on, my long tail, with a slip knot. I know that's not common. What some people do is they start their long tail cast on just by draping the yarn around the needle. I don't like that. I much prefer starting with a slip knot because that actually helps reduce the gap and the divot at the start of the round. Because what we've got now is something that's got the same height and tension as a properly formed stitch. Whereas if you just kind of drape the yarn over it, it doesn't have the same tension or size as a full stitch and it doesn't look as tidy. So start with a slip knot. And then to make your long tail cast on loose, leave yourself breathing room between the stitches. So I'm still snugging the stitches up to the needle, but I'm leaving breathing room between them. Because what that does is that gives you extra yarn in the base between the stitches. And that's how you get stretch. The other way you get stretch, the other way you add extra yarn into the base is by doing some fancy footwork on this side. So a standard long tail cast on has you grab this loop, yeah, and pull this through. That's your standard long tail cast on. But what if we could add extra yarn on this side? So instead of going just under that, this is where it gets weird. You go under both of them. I find I have to stick my tongue out for this. You go under both of them, down through the middle. Seems ridiculous, doesn't it? And then I have to crook my thumb and stick my tongue out and come over here and finish the stitch. I'll do it once more. So you go under both of them, down through the middle, and then finish like you do for the long tail. And it's adding an extra twist into the base.
So when I do the long tail cast on and I'm teaching it,
Yep.
I have it in the slingshot position and I
Yep.
tell my students to go up the thumb,
Yep.
down the pointer, and down the thumb.
Oh,
So
that's a nice way of describing it. Yeah.
that's from my friend Susan who taught
I
me.
like that. Yeah.
So when I teach them the Old Norwegian, around
Yep.
and down the thumb,
Down the thumb.
down the
Yep.
pointer,
Yeah.
and up the thumb.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
So if you didn't bend your thumb over, if you left it in the slingshot when you were
Yep.
coming around,
Yep.
So don't bend it over. And
Yep.
then bring the tip of the needle to the base of the thumb and go up. Well, you're going through the loop there, but if you just brought it down and went up into that loop, it would undo the loop. It would undo the, maybe not.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so the other way that I explain it to people is because some people do the long tail cast on this way, right? My mom does this. The knitting your thumb method, where you make a backwards loop on the right hand needle and knit that.
Mhm.
So what's happening with the twisted German or the old Norwegian is that all you're doing, instead of making a single backwards loop here, you're putting an extra twist in this. And that gives you exactly the same as the twisted German. So if people are struggling with the, I like your method though, the up and down the, yeah. If people are struggling with that, they can just do this. So it's an extra twist in here.
Nice.
So yeah, but either way, no matter how you're doing it, whether it's the slingshot or not, see if I can bring that into frame. Yeah, okay, quick hit the autofocus. Yes, look at that.
Beautiful.
We've got a little kind of knot at the base of those stitches. There's extra yarn, which means that they can, okay, I'm so close here. Don't look at the state of my nails. End of the winter. There's a lot to stretch out there. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
But whether you need the twisted German or old Norwegian, I would love that we would have agree on one name for that. Whether you need that one kind of depends on how you yourself knit. I'm for me, based on how I knit, I'm generally good with the long tail cast on as long as I'm spacing those stitches out. If you can get the thing on, it's stretchy enough. Yeah. Although that having been said, I like doing the other one because it makes me look extra clever. So there's value in that
Do you
too.
think there's any more longevity with the twisted German?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, because there's an extra little bit of fabric, so it's sort of like the difference between the knitted cast on and the cable cast on. There's two. When you do the cable cast,
Yeah.
you've got a little bit more fabric in the edge.
I mean, maybe, but
That would
so
be
I've been knitting socks since
splitting
kind of
hairs.
1996. And I've never had, yeah, I don't, yeah, I never had the top edge wear out.
Fair.
No, good question. You're making me think now. You're making me think. Okay. All right. Food for thought. So, questions. We've covered a bunch of stuff and I've answered some good questions and some food for thought here. Any questions about the pattern or about the techniques or?
And just in case anybody's interested, I'm not sure that we have the beginner's guide to writing knitting patterns in the store, but we do have the Knitter's Dictionary, knit mitts, custom shawls, and custom socks on our bookshelf to sell. So
Well, thank you.
we are very supportive of your work as a designer and as a writer of knitting information because you are very clear and very accurate.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that very much. Thank you. Yes. There's one more book that's available as an ebook. We did a short print run of it. I don't think I have a copy here. It's custom fit hats.
Oh,
And the idea behind that, we're here to talk about socks.
yeah.
So the idea behind that is you start at the top and you cast on a small stitch count and you increase until it's big enough, and very much inspired by how I swatch for socks. You swatch and then based on the measurement of your little hat swatch, you then decide where you have to stop increasing. So you can knit a hat for any head with any yarn. But we're here
Fun.
to talk about socks.
We,
Yeah.
that's okay.
Yes. Anyway.
Maybe we need to have you back for hats.
Oh yeah, I like hats too. Yes. Oh, so Donna's asked a question in the chat. Any thoughts on non-wool yarn? So if you're going to knit with a non-wool yarn, the question that I will ask, if it's a sensitivity, some people will do other than sheep, animal fibers other than sheep. For instance, alpaca or mohair. What I would say about using any alternative fibers than wool, so cotton and bamboo also true. We need to find a yarn that has nylon added in for longevity and also elastic. And those are two different things, right? Elastic is actually, I don't have any, but it's it's elastic. It's the pingy stuff we sew with. Nylon for longevity, because what nylon is in sock yarn, it's a strengthening core around which the other fibers are spun. And alpaca, lovely, soft, warm, not wildly strong. Cotton, bamboo, similar things apply. So you want sort of some nylon to act as strength, and then you need elastic, because the thing that wool does that no other fiber does, and if you ask me, it's a little miracle, is that it will stretch to accommodate and provide comfort, but bounce back when you wash it. And so, as with the warmth and the moisture of your feet from the day, again, you don't have horrible sweaty feet, I promise, our socks will stretch to accommodate and be comfortable, but when we wash them, they will return back to their original size. No other fiber does that in the same way. It's a marvelous, marvelous thing. So they will accommodate, feet that might swell during the day if you're standing on them, or if you're just wearing boots and your feet get a little too warm, it will return to its original size. So they're never permanently pushed out of shape. The challenge with these other fibers like cotton and bamboo and alpaca and silk and things is, without sort of something that helps them hold their shape, they will stretch and they'll lose their shape and they won't bounce back when you wash them. So look for something, if you're looking for something that's non-wool, if you want non-animal fiber, you can get cotton and elastic. I don't know if you can, there was sock candy, and there was another one that was available on the market. And then
Regia had a sock that was a cotton and elastic that we had for a while, and we have bamboo pop sock, which is
okay.
It's roughly 50-50. It has 8% elastic in it. It does not have any nylon. It only has the bamboo and cotton and elastic in it.
Okay. So cotton on its own is actually quite strong. It's more, the nylon is more important when you come to things like alpaca, but a bamboo and cotton and elastic blend would be a really good option, Donna. So I would look at that one. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But elastic's important. Yeah. Because otherwise the first day you wear them, they stretch and then that's it. So good question.
Thank you so much. We've come to the end of our hour. If anybody has any other questions, please ask them right now. Unmute and ask your question. But otherwise, we're delighted to have hosted you again. This is the second time we've had Kate. Hopefully we'll be doing hats or something else with you in the future. You are always a wealth of information and just delightful to visit with. Thank you so much, Kate.
Oh, thank you. It's always a joy to come and talk to you. I mean, I love talking to, it's the greatest. I get to hang out with people all over everywhere and talk about sock knitting.
Yeah.
It's the best. So thank you for the opportunity. Everybody, it was lovely to spend a little bit of time with you, and I may well see you again. Please, if you've got questions about the project, I mean, you know how to find me. I'd love to hear from you guys, and I look forward to seeing the finished results.
And I know that we shared Kate's website on our email this last week. This recording will be available on the webpage as well. And Kate is going to share her little table, and I will have that available. So just shoot me an email, not in the chat, but separate from the chat, and I will put that into an email to you.
Excellent, thank you. And I look forward to hearing about how it goes, what you guys think of my heel and my toe.
Okay, we will report back.
Excellent, thank you so much. Be well, everybody. Happy spring.
Thank you. Happy spring.
Thanks.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.